Dear friends, today on the fifth day of the ICP at Prague, I am glad to bring to you another gem. Actually, a past president of American Psychological Association, Frank Worrell. And I happened to attend his session on time perspective in psychology. I was greatly impressed by his construct and his research, and I wanted him to talk to you people. Frank, welcome. He's also the distinguished professor at University of California, Berkeley, and his research is also on another very interesting topic of talent development. So let's see what Frank has to tell us about his research on the time perspective. Frank.
Thank you very much for the invitation to speak to you.
Yeah.
Yes, so I've been studying. Came to time perspective actually through my doctoral studies. Erik Erikson's lifespan theory.
Yeah.
And he talked about the importance of time perspective as a child moves into adolescence.
Yes.
That trust, basic trust,
Versus
becomes time.
mistrust. Yeah.
Versus mistrust becomes time perspective.
Yeah.
And as the child gets into the school age, they develop what's called, he says, if competence versus industry versus inferiority becomes anticipation of achievement.
Correct.
Another idea of future.
Yeah.
And so that's really how I got into the construct of time.
Great. And in India, all psychologists, for that matter, will study Erik Erikson's theory as a part of their curriculum in their undergraduate studies, but none of us thought what you thought. And that's amazing. So, Frank, as I was telling you that I was always interested in time because of Dr. Eric Berne's influence on me, who has developed this theory of transaction analysis and who talks about something called as structure hunger. And being a psychotherapist, I stumble upon time whenever I talk about anxiety, which is so much future related, or emotions like guilt or sadness, which is so much related to the past, and the psychotherapeutic modalities of mindfulness, which tell us to be in the present.
Right.
So I think that time is something really important to be studied. Now, I want to ask you that when you are studying time, what are your findings that are important for us to look into?
What we are, what we have found is that there are multiple time constructs, as you said. And I think there are multiple psychological constructs that that we don't even think of as time constructs. As you mentioned, regret, guilt, but self-esteem, self-efficacy. We have actually been focusing a lot of our attention on what we are calling time attitudes, which are the positive and negative feelings about the past, the present, and the future. And I think perhaps one of the most surprising things that we have found is that how consistent the responses or people who have the same profiles of time attitudes are showing the same patterns of behavior in different national and cultural contexts. So we have found, for instance, similar time profiles in countries as diverse as New Zealand, the United States, Germany, South Korea. So from the South Pacific to Europe onto Asia. And if you have a positive profile, you tend to have more adaptive functioning. If you have a negative profile, you have less adaptive function.
Yeah. Do you mean, do I understand this correctly, that if you have a negative profile means you are rigid about time, And
so if you have a negative profile, what it means is, so what we measure actually, we measure 6 constructs in the time attitudes. So positive attitudes of the past and negative attitudes of the past.
Okay.
Positive attitudes of the present, negative of the present. Positive of the future, negative to the future. And so then we do cluster analysis or latent profile analysis. So we can use all 6 scores so that we are actually seeing your actual time profile. And positives, for instance, are ones who have very high scores on their positive attitudes, past, present, future, and low on the negative. And negatives are the ones who have the high negatives and low on the positives. And we, of course, have different profiles like optimist, pessimist, and different profiles that we are finding. People who are present negatives, for example, and stuff. So people whose profiles are dominated by positive things. So people who are positives or optimists tend to report more adaptive functioning than people who are negatives or pessimists.
Okay. So do you mean to say a positive profile about the past is that I have positive feelings about what has happened to me or with me or my experiences in the past?
Yes. So so our question might be like, I have happy memories of my childhood.
Okay.
And those kinds of things. And what we were trying to do is really getting at the emotional aspect of it. So we are measuring your emotional commitment or your emotional feeling about past, present, and future. And then the valence. Right?
Wow.
Positive or negative.
Yeah. And so that means you must be doing something with hope related to future. Am I hopeful about the future?
Right. So there's there's a construct called hope that is related to ours. Hope tends to be more cognitive. A couple hope theories. So for example, that individuals, Schneider's hope theory, which is the one that I use and some of my students use in their work, talks about 2 aspects of hope. One is the belief that you can, if you act, you will be successful in the future. So it's related to self-efficacy, a sense of agency.
Correct.
And then the other aspect of hope is pathways. That if I meet a roadblock, something that in fact is impeding my progress,
adversity, obstacles, barriers.
I actually can find alternate pathways. And so those 2 constructs, agency and pathways, make up the hope construct.
Okay.
And we have found, in fact, again, we have hope profiles, and people who had high agency and high pathways do better than people with low agency and low pathways. Or low agency, they're high only on one of the 2.
Yeah. So that's very interesting. And what is it that you are measuring with attention to the present, in context of the present?
So, what we look at, so we actually try to look at all 3 periods. I mean, a lot of the work on mindfulness, as you said, has been on the present. And that's really on keeping people grounded and so forth. But the sort of the time perspective theory of Zimbardo, I think what he, speculated, he suggested is that when we look at just the present, or we just look at the past, or we just look at the future, we are making assumptions about the other time periods. If we just measure the future and you have a positive aspect to the future, do you feel positive about the present? We don't know the answer to that question. So we really often try to measure all 3 time periods. When we actually measure present time attitudes, we have actually included in one study, we actually called it happiness, right? So if you're measuring present positive, we can think of it as happiness and stuff. And we found, of course, that if in fact you are happy, that you tend to have higher self-esteem, you have, again, more positive attitudes. But again, our biggest bang for the buck comes when, in fact, you are positive about all 3 periods, and not just about one alone.
And, we have always found, in the Bhagavad Gita, that is the holy book of the Hindus, we have this verse which says that you can only act in the present. You cannot act in the past, you cannot act in the future. So action is possible only in the present.
Right.
So are you measuring something of the actionability or the motivation to act in the present?
Well, I think we are measuring, I think what we are measuring is something that signals action, but it's not action. And I think that's one of the reasons, right? Because one can, for instance, planning. I can measure planning, and that says, what am I going to do in the future, right? We are actually looking at not the cognitive, but the emotional. Because I think there are some literature, and I can't remember the citation, that talks about the fact that emotion often trumps cognition. That's why fear, for example, our emotions tend to be really very powerful. And so the idea is, what we have found is that, for instance, positives, right, or people who have that high positive profile, that they report higher self-efficacy. Emotional self-efficacy, academic self-efficacy, social self-efficacy. But interestingly, our longitudinal work has shown that if I am a positive this year and I'm a positive next year, I actually am much more likely to engage in actions that are adaptive. If I move from a positive profile to a negative profile, things like smoking, use of marijuana and other substances go up. My self-efficacy goes down. If I move from a negative profile into a positive profile over time, my negative behaviors go down. I start smoking less and so forth, and my self-efficacy goes up. So in fact, even though we are not measuring behavior, we're just measuring the emotion, it's signaling behavior.
The inclination to action.
And we are seeing, seeing these patterns with regard to things like depression, anxiety, life satisfaction, and several other constructs.
And so, Frank, what has been your population which you have researched so far?
So we've done a lot of work on adolescents. I mean, I think adolescents have probably been the largest group. And in fact, when we first developed our scale, it was called the Adolescent Time Inventory. But we've now done a lot of work with adults as well, and we changed the name to the Adolescent and Adult Time Inventory because it's working with adults. But we have measured, we've looked at these Japan, South Korea, China. I think other places we have data from Singapore. We have data from, as I said, New Zealand. We have data from Spain. We have data from where else in Europe? Slovenia.
And you said you have some samples from India as well.
We have a pilot study, and what we've shown is that the scale works in India. We haven't done any correlates with India yet. But,
So I would be interested in looking at the geriatric population.
Yes, so we've actually looked. We had one study in the US that I was involved in, and then another that my postdoc, who in fact, she and I developed the scale. She has done more work. I think she has a couple other studies because one of her colleagues is a geriatric psychologist. But what we did show in one study is that the scale works. I think we had a sample that was about adolescent sample or early adult sample. We had a sample that was, I think, median age 30-something. We had a sample the median age was 60-something. So we have actually shown that the scale is working across the lifespan.
So, why? Because WHO has declared that loneliness is a pandemic now. And if we can, measure, if the scale is useful for older adults, maybe we can help them to develop positive profiles. And have you thought about interventions to take them from negative to positive?
So a couple of answers to that. One, I will say yes about the loneliness. I would also say, though, that I think the epidemic of loneliness is not just with older people. I think children are... So many people are interacting with screens rather than with people these days. That I think fuels loneliness. But with regard to interventions, so a couple studies. So there was a study done by some colleagues who, I do not know who they are, but I saw literature. They did a positive psychology intervention in Spain. And what they found is that individuals in the treatment group moved into a positive profile. Yes. We have just submitted an article for review where we actually, a psychodynamic intervention was done at a university counseling clinic. And even though it was not aimed at the time attitudes, it was aimed at them solving problems, that individuals who received the intervention, the psychodynamic counseling intervention, actually their present negative scores went down, their present positive scores went up, and their future negative scores went down. And one more, we have a study going on right now in Chile where they're doing a mindfulness intervention with children. The pilot showed very promising results that it reduced behavior problems. And so they are going forward with the full intervention in schools, some schools in Chile, this next year coming up.
So, Frank, um, I am also thinking that if this scale can be translated, has it already been translated into Indian language?
It's been translated into Hindi. So we do have a Hindi, and we have, as I said, we did a pilot study, and the reliability of the scores were good. And so we are more than willing, of course, to participate in a larger scale study. Both with children, but also with older individuals.
With older individuals, because we were actually planning a study with the geriatric population, and this we can use as a pre and post intervention experimental design with the intervention for them. We can screen people in the negative profile. We can give an intervention, and then we can see where.
Yes, that's where this research needs to go. That's exactly where this research needs to go.
So, Frank, this has been really interesting, and I think that this is one of the most important takeaways for me from this ICP Congress. And I'm so happy that you found time to talk to me. And, this interview is going to be watched by so many psychologists back in India, and you're going to inspire all of them.
Well,
Thank you so much.
I'm very glad. It's always nice when your work is used and is useful.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Namaste.